and we're going to get started with location and what to consider when working with a location for photo shoots, whether it be on location or whether it be at a convention. So, just a primer, just to get us started here. So a location, end of the day, will make or break your story. It is a setting. So in an ideal world, you have the power to have your powerful elf character stand in the middle of this beautiful, expansive forest or this majestic castle. You might have your mighty hero saving the world with the cityscape in the background. Might have a sci-fi character, a Mandalorian on a spaceship, ready to go to battle. But we are in the real world. That is not necessarily something that's available to us. So for on-location photo shoots, you can still make it work. Photography is a lie, right? So working with our location, working with what we have, we can make the shoot feel more authentic. For convention settings though, you do have to work with what you have. You might have something a heck of a lot more limited. Like around here, we have trees. That's about it. So how do we make that work? So I'm gonna break this up, talk about on-location photography as well as convention photography and some of the things that you wanna look for, some of the things that will help you out, and some of the things that you want to consider logistically to actually work with your locations. So when it comes to on-location photography, there's some pros and some cons there. More so pros and things to watch out for when you're on location. So pros, of course, you have the ability to choose the best location to match your theme. Depending on where you live, however, your options might be a little bit more limited. You might have to get a little bit more inventive with your locations. But you do have a lot more of a broad option for your backdrops, what you have to work with. You also have the better ability to scout a location, especially if you're in the area, you need to pop down to a location you've never been to, maybe a nearby botanical garden, nearby like museum or something like that. You can scout that out. Cons, you have foot traffic. The normies, if you will. They might be around, they might give you weird looks. They might get overly excited. They might be, little angry. They can all happen. So there are those issues. Permits might be required. I know in Atlanta that's become more and more of a thing. Other cities don't really care. But there might be some places where the background is copyrighted. No, it's weird to say, but that does happen where a location is copyrighted. I don't know the logistics, but they do it. You also have to consider location accessibility. How easy is it for you and especially the cosplayer to get to that location, to get to that particular spot? Safety, is it safe? And is the location still there? With Atlanta, there's been a lot of construction. Locations that I used 5 years ago are no longer there. And that happens surprisingly regularly. Where it's just like, wow, I had this cool abandoned greenhouse. Oh wait, it's closed off. Oh, there was this cool graffitied wall. Oh wait, it's been torn down and now it's a luxury high rise. So everything is changing. So finding locations for me, there are a lot of ways that I've done that. Back when Instagram hashtags were actually a thing, I would use Instagram. Do a location search based off of what other photographers are doing. Maybe like ATL fashion photographers. ATL engagement photographers, wedding photographers, so on and so forth. That's going to give you, and then that's why I say photographers, because that's going to give you a lot of what the photographers in the area are doing. Of course, the pitfall is that also might be a popular space for, engagement photographers, portrait photographers, fashion photographers, so on. But that's how I found one particular location in Atlanta before any of the other cosplay photographers even knew what it was. Other things, learn about what the other photographers are doing, where they're shooting. But I will say, don't get upset if they gatekeep the location. I know gatekeeping is a taboo word, but when it comes to locations, I kind of understand why people are protective of locations. If only for once a location becomes popular on Instagram, everybody is there. And you're like, well, I guess that's it. So there have been a couple of locations that's happened in Atlanta that were very, very best kept secrets, blew up on Instagram, and now it is kind of a madhouse. So you might run into that case where a local photographer may not tell you the location because they've kept it, and to a degree, it's not fair. That said, Google Maps and Street View, that's also good. That's better for scouting. So if you know of an area, general area to look at Google Maps, look at Google Street View. Just be careful if it's out of date. But that does give you a good frame of reference. And just Google Atlanta engagement photography locations. Google your city name, engagement photography, fashion photography locations, so on and so forth. Or if you're visiting a city, let's say you're going out to Southern California, Los Angeles, or somewhere like that. Google Los Angeles engagement photography. That can give you locations to work with that are picturesque, that have good light, and something to work with. Other things, local parks and trails are good. If you have any local green space, local trails, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Trail websites like alltrails.net. That's something that I use pretty frequently, especially if I'm going to a new city. It's like if I'm going to, say, Boise, Idaho, I might look at Idaho trails. Of course, be careful with that. Make sure the trail is accessible and not bears everywhere. And also pre-scout. That's better if it's local. Of course, if you're traveling to a new place, if you have time to set aside to scout, sure, but chances are you really don't. So breaking this down to fantasy locations versus urban locations. First of all, if there are any ruins in your area, one popular spot in Atlanta is called Soap Creek. It's a paper mill ruin from the Civil War. Very popular with photographers out there. So ruins, old cathedrals, that sort of thing might be good. Of course, check for the accessibility, check for if you're allowed to shoot there, all that good stuff. Hiking trails I find are pretty good, especially if you live in an area with a lot of nature. Hiking trails I like because other photographers aren't typically doing photo shoots at a hiking trail or hiking park sort of thing. They're more so at those picturesque parks, botanical gardens. I should have added botanical gardens on this list. If there are local botanical gardens, check that out, but also check out the rules. If there is a permit that's required at a garden, it used to be a lot of gardens in Atlanta, whatever. But kind of the pitfall again of the more photographers there are, the more bad behavior there can be, especially if say you have a senior portrait session and they're leaving chairs, leaving things everywhere, just making a mess of the place, or people are making a mess of the place. Then the location will start cracking down and say, you know what, you have to pay us $200 to be able to shoot here, or just you're not allowed to shoot here at all. But still, botanical gardens are an option. Parks, local green space, that's pretty neutral. I also like to look at rivers, creeks, and beaches. There's a nearby river by my apartment that I use quite extensively. It also has like a random bamboo forest, which is great. Not sure why there's a bamboo forest in Atlanta, but it's right there. Kind of a hike. But yeah, when in doubt, stick a cosplayer in some bushes. Nice neutral green backdrop, but also watch for bugs. And if you're out there in nature, watch for ticks, watch for all that not so fun stuff. The random mosquito bite that just hits somebody in the face and you're like, oh, RIP. Urban locations. Urban parks and urban trails. There are a few parks and trails, like we have the Atlanta Beltline, which is this urban trail that's been converted out of like old railway, and it's now just a walking trail that goes around the city. I don't actually shoot on the Beltline, but I shoot around it. Industrial areas open to the public, e.g. like Sloss Furnace. I heard that there was like a abandoned prison in like outside in Missouri that's been open to the public that people are able to shoot in. They don't really care. They're like, oh, go right ahead. But again, one of those things is locations tend to be available until they're not. So don't be surprised if one day you're at this one location that has been fantastic. It's been great. And then one day security's like, hey, you can't be here. Then the next day, security's like, I don't care. Have at it. It's like, what do y'all want? I don't. Downtown districts, but of course, keep safety in mind. If you're shooting in like a downtown, depending on the safety of that downtown. If you're going to be shooting downtown of your city, look for those public spaces, or at least where people are around, not super isolated. That's safe. So pay attention to that. Parking decks are also good. I mean, especially for cosplay, and not many people are going to be shooting in parking decks. You're not going to see a lot of engagement photographers doing photo shoots in a parking deck. So, I mean, you might have some. I mean, there are some spots, especially if it's a deck that's overlooking the city, then that's a little bit different. But more than likely, they're not. But of course, keep your safety in mind. So on-location safety, so if you are going into a place that's a little more rough, safety in numbers, I mean, there is that, having folks there. So it's not just you and the cosplayer going into not an unsafe spot, but a spot that might be a little bit rough around the edges. If you do feel like you're in an unsafe situation, be ready to get out. Be ready to leave. Walk away. My head is if I am in the city, my head is on the swivel. And if I start to see something in the distance, I'm going to slowly or very quickly redirect. It's like, I'm not going to let the cosplayer know unless it's like, we need to go. I'm going to be like, oh, hey, let's go over here. And then just walk away. Try to be head on the swivel. Be ready to get out. And if things do turn, it's okay to flee. Which, oh God, that just reminded me. Dragon Con last year. So story time. Impromptu story time. Dragon Con, which was a crazy con. And it is a peak Atlanta experience. Don't let this deter you from Dragon Con. So it was Sunday. And there were a bunch of photographers and cosplayers hanging out at this church, a little bit away, not too far away from the hotel. And we're just having a good time. Again, Sunday, everything's winding down and all that good stuff. So I'm photographing a cosplayer friend, There's a few other photographers there. People like, if you know Mineral Blue and his cosplay videos, DT Jam, and a few other folks. So we're shooting. Next thing you know, we hear a pop in the background. We're like, what is that? Then we hear another pop. Of course, the Atlantans are like, wait, is that a gunshot? Yes, it was a gunshot. It was multiple gunshots. And we hear somebody yell, get on the ground. We see the police chasing some guy across the street. Of course, all the cosplayers and the photographers are like, we gotta go. And we start running. So we're running this way. Of course, the perpetrator was also running towards us in the same direction. Pure chaos, pure pandemonium, but I swear out of Looney Tunes, the person being chased tripped, gun goes flying out into the street, cops like gets on him, and we're like, what just happened? Of course, there was some other dude that's like just nonchalantly, it's like, oh yeah, y'all are right now, you're good. And we're just like, what? Did that seriously just happen? But we all had a fun enough time at Dragon Con that was like, you know what? We are now trauma bonded by whatever just happened just now. Yeah, we survived. But I joke, but it's like, that could have turned sideways very, very quickly. And we would not have known that until, well, something could have happened. So it is important to be mindful, and it's now I'm like, I don't want to go back to that location because something could happen. So, like I said, it's all fun and games, kind of funny now looking back, and we all like never forget. But just be mindful of the safety of your location. Avoid meeting in isolated locations, and be mindful of the accessibility. Also, let people know where you're going. So, in case if you don't go home on time, cosplayer doesn't come on time, then it's like, okay, something might have happened. We need to retrace. So, 4 locations, 4 stories. The one on the left, that's by that, the Atlanta Beltline, that location I was talking about. That kind of also goes into this idea of locations changing. 3 years ago, that building wasn't there. Those buildings to the right weren't there. That used to be like a open or like a huge parking lot with the Georgia Power building. Now they're luxury high-rises. So the locations are going to keep changing, especially if it's an up-and-coming area. But the benefit is, when a location sort of changes like that, you might lose the old, but you might gain something new. And that might keep changing until the duration of the actual construction. So it does sort of like cycle itself through. The one on the second one right there, my friend Riddle wanted to do something European sort of look for the Spy Family. And she had this idea of like, there's this little ritzy part of town. I've never even heard of it, but she recommended that for that shoot. And what I did was, because I'd never been there, I got there early, scouted it, tried to figure out, okay, what's going to work for this shoot. That way, when they arrived, we can actually quickly get the shoot done, especially if it's one of those things where security is like, hey, you all need to go. So for me, it's also being able to get photos quickly in case somebody's like, hey, you can't be here. But most of the times it's pretty chill. So we're able to like sort of hang out, be respectful though. I'm not going to linger for like 3 hours and just like, oh, it's our place now. Because there are businesses around and they are people put traffic coming through and out, in and out. The other one, Sloss Furnace, which is in Birmingham. That's this huge industrial furnace that's been converted to like a park. I have to pay like $20, something to that extent. I can't remember exactly how much you have to pay. But really it's like, you can go ahead and shoot there. You just have to call ahead, get permission. But if you have a location like that, it is important to like, just figure out what the rules are. And the one on the right, we'll come back to that one. So, another thing we have to be mindful of is the costume and its interaction with the location. Not only do we have to worry about, does this cosplay fit with that location? Can that cosplay actually get to that location? So how well can the cosplayer walk? If it's a hiking trail, can they maneuver through the trail, through hills, down hills, uphill, so on and so forth? Or are they just sort of waddling? Or is something going to break because the knee joints aren't exactly very movable? What is their range of motion? Again, if they can't really walk very well, or let's say there was one shoot that I did where it was like weird little boot coverings. So it was one of those things where we actually had to take the coverings off for them to be able to get up the hill. And then once we got to that location, put the coverings back on. So that also goes into bring a comfortable pair of shoes if you're a cosplayer. Like, unless the shoes are somehow connected to the rest of the costume and you can't take them off, always have a comfortable pair of shoes, something you don't mind getting scuffed. How hot or cold is the cosplayer? That's going to come with the weather. Summer right now, it's hot. Of course, right now I'm not too interested in trying to do a shoot, unless it's like early morning or really late evening. But if it's summer and the cosplayer is in full armor, all of a sudden, we're going to have to really take in consideration, how hot are they going to get? That's going to impact the time. Is the location just nothing but bare sun? Or is there going to be open shade? If they have to walk a lot, that's a timer, right? And what I mean by a timer is, if we're having to walk in full armor in the summer heat, that's going to exhaust them. That's going to be less energy for them to expend during the shoot. So instead of like an hour-long shoot, you might have 10 minutes to shoot before they tap out. So that's when I am treating a location, I'm thinking, if their armor, we need to shoot somewhere close to the parking lot. So suit up, go over here in this like wide little area, shoot, then we can get back to the car. Are there problematic parts of the cosplay? And what I mean by problematic are there finicky parts? If they turn at an angle, something's going to snap. If they try to walk, something's going to snap. So if the costume's very mobile, then that gives me a lot more options. That gives you a lot more options as to where to go. If it's not very mobile, then we got to really focus on location options that are going to be close to where we have parked. And are there any details you want to capture? Also, are we operating on the 6-foot rule or the 6-inch rule? If you're familiar with the 6-foot rule, it's like, don't get in closer to 6 feet, look at this thing. It looks fine on a distance. Versus the 6-inch where it's like, oh yeah, I spent 1,000 hours on this leg alone. Take pictures of all these details, please. So, general logistics, pre-scout when you can. Have comfortable shoes on hand, if you can have comfortable shoes, especially if you're going to a location with platforms. Have those comfortable shoes on hand so you can actually get from point A to point B. Mindful of the rules, permits required, are there any areas off limits? And be mindful of the weather. Is it raining? Is it hot? Is it cold? So on. Pre-scouting the location. Determine if the location is viable in the first place. There are certain locations in Atlanta, again, back to that river example. On a good day, there are a lot of rocks in the river that pop out, and you can actually walk into the river on those rocks. However, if there's a good rainstorm that comes through, that river is a lot higher. And all of a sudden, the trail is a lot muddier. So you don't want to take a nice cosplay through that mud. Or back to the example, you might have used the location 15 different times in the past, and now it's gone because they have torn something down and there's construction. So when possible, you don't have to do this all the time. Sometimes you're just winging it. A lot of times I'm just sort of winging it. But if you're going somewhere new, do that pre-scout, whether it be like a day before, a week before, or even if it's an hour before the shoot. Get there early, start getting a feel for the location, get a feel for what spots are good, get a feel for the light. That way, when the cosplayer gets there, you're able to get to work. You already have some options selected, and you can knock things out. You also determine how much walking is involved, if there are any issues with the location, and you'll be able to find good backdrops. So, let's talk about this. This was an adventure. So, as you can see, there's a lot going on with this cosplay. Very detailed, very beautiful, but hard to see. Notice the shoes. Those are hooves. That cosplayer can't walk, or can barely walk. And they cannot stand that long. It's a lot of this like. Also, that 6-foot-tall wolf. So we're looking for a location. There aren't many botanical gardens that we can shoot in, let alone bring a 6-foot-tall wolf. But there are a bunch of trails. One idea I had was a bamboo forest. But before we did that, me and the cosplayer did a scout of that forest to see what that hike would be like. And almost immediately it was like, this is not gonna work because it's a winding trail up and downhill. That wolf, we needed at least 3 people to carry it. So we went to another location that was a lot easier to access, a lot more straight, a lot more chill, if you will, but still a little bit of effort because 3 people needed to carry that wolf to the spot we needed to shoot. So we found the spot. We had pretty much a team of people trying to help with this. Like 5 people were trying to get this shoot pulled together. And the bow is also very fragile. So we were living on dreams, man, just hoping. But the other thing that I did, knowing full well she was on hooves, I got a lawn chair so that when we were not shooting, she could sit down. Then when it was time to shoot, or first I'll be able to like set the wolf back up, get it in position, then be like, okay, let me have you stand here, because she did not have a lot of range of motion. So that location scouting was helpful because it helped us choose a location, but it also helped us understand what are the issues with this location, what are going to be the issues with the costume, and then how can we mitigate it? Because again, we're going to be on a timer, especially with a very taxing costume. A cosplayer only is going to have so much energy to work with, so we want to maximize that time and maximize their energy. Have comfy shoes on hand. Again, I said this before, and this is that bamboo forest we were talking about. It was like a 45-minute walk to that forest. And we had 2 cosplayers in very nice cosplays, but it was one of those things that, hey, we want to do this shoot at this forest. The cosplayer's like, we want to do this shoot here. I would have been fine going somewhere else, but you know what? It's adventure time. We're going to do it. So me as a photographer, I had to start thinking about what do we need to do to get there safely. The cosplayers had to think about what do they need to do to protect their costumes to get there safely. So first, Yaya had comfortable shoes, didn't mind getting dirty. Melinda basically walked to the location, her costume in a garment bag, and then put the costume on when we got to the forest. That way, the costumes did not get dirty. There were a couple hairy spots, but we made it work. And we were able to get a lot of really amazing shots at this forest. Now, convention photography is a whole different beast because we are real limited with our locations. So, pros about convention photography, the reason why I keep coming back, is the sheer number of cosplayers there that you can work with. On a given day, I can work with a Zelda, then a Iron Man, then a Knight, then a Mandalorian, then it's some anime character, Chainsaw Man, whoever, somebody from League of Legends. So there's no lack of options. And there's a wide variety of those cosplays and concepts that you can tackle. But of course, you have limited areas to shoot, limited options to shoot. Backgrounds may not match the theme. Like, where am I going to get a nice sci-fi background here? There are also large crowds. Like, this con is chill, but Dragon Con, KatsuCon, MomoCon are not. So you really have to start thinking, how do we work with these locations? What do we need to do? And challenging lighting. Convention lighting, convention in space, like an exhibit hall is terrible. We're not going to do a shoot there. But where else can we go that is going to have that good lighting? Is there spots that we can find? So, tips, again, if you're going to the con for the first time, scout ahead of time. Remember, if the camera doesn't see it, it doesn't exist. So there can be crowds everywhere. There's crowds to the right, to the left of me. I mean, it was Thursday, so it wasn't as many people. But the camera doesn't know that. It's out of frame. Schedule early when you can, but be mindful, cosplayers, if they have to get up early or shoot early, they're gonna have to get up earlier. But early shoots, they tend to have less crowds because, let's be honest, a lot of folks probably have partied hard the night before, so they're not gonna get up until like 12 p.m. at the earliest. Sounds silly, to avoid crowds, go to where there aren't crowds. I follow that pretty much to a T. So I don't want to deal with people. So I'm not going to be around people on a photo shoot. But look for neutral backgrounds if that doesn't work. Crop tight if you're in a crowded space. Going back to if the camera can't see it, it doesn't exist. Respect the location. We do not own that space. I said in my last panel, if we're annoying enough, the hotel venue can be like, y'all are done. We're not renewing the contract. So respect the location. Don't climb on the rocks. They say don't climb on the rocks. I mean, I see some laughs and you're like, But if you are climbing the rocks, at least be subtle about it. This is me. But if you are going to go off-site, because there are photographers who do go off-site and do shoots, communicate that ahead of time, establish that rapport with the cosplayer. So, hey, let's go off-site. Is it okay if we go here to knock out some photos? So this is my first time at a con. How do I scout? Again, before you get to the con, Google Maps, look around the convention space. That's sort of what I did here. Try to get a feel for what the light was, or not the light, what was around, which was trees. It's like, okay, not much else to do, then all right. Look at the hotel and convention website. More importantly, past convention hashtags. Start to see what's been shot here before. And if photos have been taken at the con by other photographers who have attended, take a look to see what they've done. That way, at least you have a mental library of like, okay, there's this location, this location. So when you walk around, you arrive at the con, do that walkthrough, you can see, oh, this was taken here. This was sort of like the framing. That gives you at least some perspective as to what's there. Again, camera doesn't see it, doesn't exist. So again, framing people out. For me, it's also about using a shallow depth of field. So that makes it easier to frame people out, make everything blurry in the background. And also, if I need to Photoshop, it's a lot easier to Photoshop a shiny or like a blur than it is a whole person that's in frame. If you have to utilize close portraits to capture the cosplayer, do that. Frame low to high. There is a running joke that I like to lay down on the ground for photos to get the shot. It's like how it's dedicated. Honestly, there's more practicality. One, I'm tall. If I am shooting somebody, the normal person, I would always be like this. And I'm also old, not that old, but my back hurts. Laying down is very comfortable. But the other thing is it's much easier to frame people out when I am on the ground because I'm shooting low to high. Of course, you do have to be mindful, watch out for the double chins and all of that. But when I do frame low to high, it's much easier to frame people out. So there is that practical reason why I am on the ground for a photo shoot. So, avoid crowds, go where the people aren't. So this is MomoCon over at the Georgia World Congress Center. And there's this deck called the Red Deck, which is a massive, massive, massive parking deck. And what I'll do is, of course, ask, hey, are you cool with going away from the crowds? And usually people are, unless they're in like a costume and they're exhausted and like, oh man, I don't want to walk that far. And it's like, oh, you know what, fair. I wouldn't want to walk that far either. But being able to find good spots away from like the con center itself, that is an option. Also, if the cosplayer does want to bring somebody around with them, that's cool. You have a handler, somebody who can do a cape flip or carry stuff. But yeah, sometimes, especially with Katsucon's very crowded. So I've shot at that parking deck, not too far for those like really urban sort of looks. And that's not super far away from like the main area. Another thing is backdrop neutrality. When all else fails, look for a neutral backdrop. Blank wall that has good light. Windows. Look for stairs. Building corners, for instance. Especially if it has good light. Again, like at Katsucon, across from the Gaylord, there's that like one weird little building, like gray, silver. I think they use it for like meeting space, but there's a lot of good angles that are very neutral, a lot of gray walls, a lot of windows. So if you do have a sci-fi shoot, you can utilize that. If you do have a KDA shoot, I did an arcane like sort of shoot there. It's there, and because those corners are very neutral, more timeless, that we are able to grab some good photos and still feel somewhat authentic to the cosplay. Fantasy cosplays, trees, shrubbery or bushes, green space, flowers, again, neutral walls. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of convention centers are in the middle of the city. There might not be a lot of forest around there. So you do want to look for, if it is that one single tree out there, Dragon Con, they have that like giant like columns right by the city or right by the hotels that everybody shoots at. But at that point, it's just framing people out. Nearby locations that better match the theme of the cosplay, look for those. But of course, again, keep safety in mind. So, we have 15 minutes. Well, what I am going to do, maybe for the next like 10 minutes, I'm going to break down how I approached a bunch of these locations. So it's one thing for me to lecture, another thing for me to actually walk through my shooting process. And then after that, if you have some time for questions, we can knock out some questions. So this shoot, the KDA shoot that I have, a group of 4 and an Acura NSX. They wanted to shoot with that NSX, have that group. So I needed a space or location with the city in the background. The original plan was to do this at Dragon Con. Things fell through. So we did this like later in the year. So we did do it by the Dragon Con hotels. So at that point, we needed a spot for that car. So we looked at one of the nearby parking decks. Parked at that parking deck, had the cosplayers stand around the car, and just did a bunch of shots around the car, on the deck to get the city in the background. Then we went down to this plaza here. When the sun went down, I knew from previous experience that the lights would come on, give us this purple hue, very cool. And then we were able to just grab shots at that park or that plaza. Now, idea of locations changing, rules changing. So this was early the next year, not even that long. We wanted to do a Belle shoot. So that one scene, if you've seen Belle with the parade, you have those buildings, and we knew, okay, these buildings right here would perfectly match the aesthetic. Then we had that same little plaza. So no problem, right? I did see on the website that they did want people to call ahead to get permission, to get a permit, but it was free. So I was like, you know what? This is a big deal. We want to make sure we're squared away and not have any surprises. So I called, got the permit, the unofficial permit for that one. But when we got to the shoot, apparently word didn't filter through to security, and security came and kicked us out. Like, you can't shoot here. Shot there many times before, no issue, but that day, security was like, you can't shoot here because the background's copyrighted. And if you don't know, that plaza is where they filmed this finale of Falcon and Winter Soldier. So that's where that was like the UN building of Falcon and Winter Soldier. So we have to call the people who gave us a permit. It's a Sunday. They have to call their boss, the people, the security. It's a whole ordeal. And at this point, we're just like, we're going back to to one of the other decks nearby, because at least we can get the shots there, but realizing the same could very well happen, where we can get kicked out, all of a sudden our plans are out the window. But things did get settled, but it was a hassle. Things don't go right all the time. Okay, this shoot, I mentioned it earlier. This is a shoot where we did not start off strong. And this also kind of goes back to the part about gatekeeping locations to a degree. We wanted to try the bamboo forest for this shoot. Years ago, no one really knew about the bamboo forest. You could park there fairly easily and get there. I mean, it's a hike, but it was like one of Atlanta's gems. But I think it was during 2020 where people were obviously looking for outdoor things to do. Somehow that secret gem got shared on a popular Instagram page. All of a sudden everybody knew about the bamboo forest and everybody's trying to park there. The location has to lock down parking because everybody's parking weird spots on this one lane road, which is treacherous. And also the parking lot's redesigned. So a lot of the parking was taken out. So we get to the location, there is no parking at all. And it doesn't look like anybody is going to be leaving anytime soon. So instead of panicking, we're like, all right, we need another location. So we go to the other side of the river, which is still just as picturesque, doesn't have the bamboo forest. So we improvise. The hike to the river is a lot less painful, but we got some amazing shots, some of the prettiest color that I've ever seen, especially for a shoot like that. So be flexible. Your initial plan might fall through. That's okay. Have a backup, or if you have to go on the fly. It's like, okay, we have another location, let's try this instead. Star Wars shoot here. This is what's called Arabia Mountain. This is a very popular spot. in Atlanta, but it also gives us a good science fiction sort of look with the desolate, rocky landscape. Not much to report here other than there are spots that you can try to look for that does give you a little bit more of a sci-fi look. All else fails, you can pretend your sci-fi story is in a forest. Plenty of that going around. But yeah, that's really what this shoot does. Is just give you an idea of Arabian Mountain. Now, weather. This is a trail outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I think close to Black Mountain, I want to say. Me and the cosplayers, they're my friends. I'm staying with them for the week or weekend. And we're like, hey, let's grab some shots. So we go to this nice little trail. Notice it's cloudy and overcast. There's a threat of rain, but we're not really worried about it. But we had to hike like 20 minutes to get to this like little waterfall. And as we're shooting, we get some good shots. We start to feel the rain, little sprinkles. I was like, okay, this is time for us to walk back because it took us 20 minutes. Not 5 minutes into the walk, the sky just lets up or opens up, and we were getting soaked. It got to the point where the lightning cloud mashup cosplayer is using the Buster Sword to cover my camera so it does not get soaked. So be like, if you have a hike, be mindful of the weather. Have umbrellas. Don't be like us. And if it is sketchy, like maybe reconsider your initial plans. But of course, sometimes you might be visiting out of town, or they might be visiting out of town, so this is the only chance it's going to work. If that's the only chance to make it work, have some protections in place, umbrellas, escape plans, something like that. All right. This is the one and only time I went to Colossal Con. Realized that con was not for me. But this is one of those things where you, like, just because we're at a con doesn't mean we can't make things work, especially if the cosplay fits that vibe. In this case, the cosplay fits that vibe. This is a raven, a beach raven. We're at a water park. At that point, it's kind of easy mode, right? So for me, it was, okay, let's find the best light. That we're under this like cabana, light coming in. You can notice how soft it is around the cosplayer's face. Just having the cosplayer pose in a very relaxed manner, playing with the glasses, sort of going into that idea of posing, like giving their hands something to do that makes it look like a real scene. And then framing things in a way, I mean, yeah, you can sort of see some anime craziness in the background, but I shot with a shallow depth of field. So you can't really tell what's going on in the background. That's what I mean by shoot with a shallow depth of field, because it's easier to blur things out. So with that, all of a sudden, we're not at a con. This is Raven actually at a beach resort, just, I guess, relaxing, if Raven can even relax. You get the idea. So, this shoot, the Spider Joker mashup, very crazed, very deranged, very much like the Joker. So for me, the main thing I wanted to do was shoot at what's called Krog Street Market, or not Krog Street Market, Krog Street Tunnel, which is this graffiti tunnel that goes by the Beltline, the Atlanta Beltline. So the other thing was, you know what? I also wanted to get some good natural light shots because Krog Street is not the most well lit, but there is a parking garage not too far from the location. So what I did was we started off the parking garage, perfect time of day because you can see the light. Notice how it was golden hour, so the light was low, the shadows were very dramatic, and we were just able to really get some shots within that urban parking garage sort of setting. Just absolutely crazy looking. And then end things at that tunnel. with all the graffiti. So we used 2 locations, and one sort of dictated the other. And Katsucon. And let's see what else we have. Okay, we'll end on the Katsucon one because it's 2:55 and I do want to give you some time. At least a couple questions. Katsucon is very busy. We all know this. Yesterday's panel, I mentioned about the Katsucon gazebo and how everybody wants to shoot at the gazebo, and how, personally, I don't shoot at the gazebo because of light. You're backlighting people to shoot at the gazebo. But if you turn around, you have the gold doors, right? And you're able to get shots with the gold doors. But of course, you still have crowds, right? So in this case, we did this early, and it's like the earlier you do, like grab photos at the Katsucon gazebo or the Katsucon, the less crowds there are. And it's very easy to very quickly get a shot with everybody framed out with those gold doors. And that was just a matter of, instead of looking at the gazebo, turn around where the light's good, and boom, you have this gold, beautiful shot. So you can make a location work even if it is busy, but it is sometimes just based off of opportunity. And having your head on a swivel, being like, oh, that location's open right now, let's go over there real quick. At that point, I don't own this spot either. If somebody walked behind me, it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, they have to get from point A to point B. So we just have to be very careful with that. And that said, we're about 2:55. Any questions? Yes.
The worst mistake you've done choosing a location?
Worst mistake. I think I'll speak generally. Worst mistake is choosing a location that isn't accessible to the cosplayer. So going to a location, realizing that there was something very fragile about that suit, about that cosplay, and realizing, oh wait, we can't actually get there. Or no, the worst mistake, bad light. Getting to a location and the light at a time where the light was really bad and there was nothing you can do about it. Like there wasn't any open shade, you could barely backlight, the wind was blowing. Basically there's like, you can get shots, but something about the cosplay did not photograph well at that location and the light was bad. So that's why it's like, timing is also important to location photo shoots. Because a location could look good at 9 a.m., but it looks terrible at 7 p.m. at golden hour, ironically enough. So, yes?
Would it be helpful if you had like extra lighting for that?
Oh yeah, it would be, but I'm lazy. I don't care lighting. Like that. So that's the pain that I have chosen for myself. But by all means, if you do have lighting, if you are a strobe photographer, that can help. But then you have to watch out for, is the location going to be feisty if you have lighting? Or if you start breaking out like bigger lights, is security all of a sudden thinking that this is going to be a professional shoot or a commercial shoot and demand $500? So that's kind of also why I don't utilize a lot of lights or any lights, because I do like being able to get in, not linger, because they're pretty chill if you're not lingering too long. But the moment you start setting things up, somebody can be like, wait a second, y'all need to go. So, but it all depends on the location too.
You can have lighting for your camera too.
Yeah. Yeah. So with on-camera lighting, like strobes and all that, like I also don't particularly care for the look, but you can have like handheld lighting on the camera. My style is very natural light, very cinematic. I need to have things look authentic. That's why, like, if I am not super bothered by like weird, like not weird shadows, but harsh shadows, like on the face, because that does give a level of like authenticity. But I recognize that other photographers might like to have those lights, and that's okay. They might want to have like that little handheld light or a strobe because that's their style. But for me, because my style is that way, that's why I have to start considering, okay, these are my constraints. Let me work around those constraints. But other folks might have their own constraints. Yeah. Yep.
Any tips for like beach photography? 'Cause like I scoped, I live like a Great Lake area.
Yeah.
And sometimes scoping beaches is a little hard depending on the type of beach and then cosplayers wearing shoes, whatnot. Is there any tips you have on like what to bring to a beach maybe that might assist or like certain angles of cosplay?
Part of it's timing. Like obviously beaches don't have a lot of open shade, so golden hour, early, mid-morning would be more ideal. Shoes, I mean, my first beach shoot was a nightmare because I didn't have the shoes and I was getting trapped in the sand and all that. And I guess it also depends, like, if it's East Coast, what time of day, sun rises in the east, sets in the west. So if it's rising in the east, they're going to get hit by a direct sun, if they're but facing towards the shore. But if they are facing away from the water, the sun's going to be behind them, so they're going to get backlit. West Coast is very different. It's the opposite problem. So then it's like, all right, I need to reposition based off of where the sun is. So one, keep in mind where the sunlight is, and if you do have any ability to have comfy shoes, have a towel. Maybe it is going to be one of those things you need a reflector to fill. Go ahead and have the reflector. So, one more question. I see. Are y'all waiting for your panel? All right, quick question.
Do you have any tips for cosplayers working with photographers? Things that you would want them to know on the other side of the camera?
Okay, show up early. And that's not to be like condescending. You have to factor in get ready time. You have to factor in travel time. Whether or not you have to get ready at the location. If you're wearing armor, you didn't drive in it. So the meet time is at 7, but it's going to take another hour to get suited up at the location. You have to figure that out. So that's going to be a big thing for the cosplayers. Like, recognize that, hey, just because the call time is X time, let me figure out how much time it's going to take to get there, how much time it's going to take for me to get ready if I'm getting ready there, or if I'm good to go. That's very different. And the other thing that I'm going to say is, again, have those comfy shoes, have a bottle of water, have a comb if you have like a long wig that needs to be straightened every once in a while. So, all right. I'll let y'all, I know I ate into your time, but y'all, thank you very much.